Imagine an animal that could look a giraffe dead in the eye. Now imagine it folding up and launching into the sky. For 50 years, scientists argued about almost everything to do with this creature. How big it was, how it got off the ground, what it ate, even whether something this size could fly at all. It was named after a god, and it was one of the very last of its kind. This is Quetzalcoatlus. In 1971, in the desert of West Texas, a geology student named Douglas Lawson was working through the rock of Big Bend National Park, and in the stone he found a hollow wing bone, far too large to make sense. Extrapolated out, this single bone implied a flying creature larger than anything believed able to take to the air. In 1975, the animal was named Quetzalcoatlus northropi, after Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent sky god of the Aztecs, and Jack Northrop, the flying wing aircraft pioneer, a god of the air and a master of flight. But the first specimen was only fragments. From those scraps, scientists had to estimate the whole. The number they reached was so large that the first question wasn't what the animal was. It was whether the estimate could possibly be real. Let's clear up the biggest misconception immediately. Quetzalcoatlus was not a dinosaur. It's almost always lumped in with them, but it sits on a separate branch of the reptile tree. Quetzalcoatlus was a pterosaur, a flying reptile, a cousin of the dinosaurs rather than one of them. And pterosaurs were pioneers, the first vertebrates ever to achieve true powered flight over 200 million years ago, long before the first bird. The old image of a cold, scaly, leathery creature is also wrong. The evidence now suggests pterosaurs were covered in fine, hair-like filaments called pycnofibers. They were fuzzy, likely warm-blooded, insulated, and active. Some researchers argue these filaments are related to the structures that became feathers, though that remains debated. So this was a powered, fuzzy, flying giant. Which raises the obvious question, just how giant? Because that number has been gotten wrong again and again. Here is the paradox at the heart of this animal. Stood upright, Quetzalcoatlus reached about 3.5 meters at the shoulder, roughly 12 feet, eye to eye with a modern giraffe. Its wingspan stretched 10 to 11 meters, wider than an F-16, more than double the largest flying bird alive today. Now hold that giraffe in your mind and ask the question that breaks everything. A giraffe weighs over 900 kilograms. So how much did a giraffe-sized flying animal weigh? Around 230 kilograms, 500 pounds. Stop and feel how strange that is. Same height as a giraffe, a quarter of its weight, and it flew. That number is not an accident. It's the product of extreme biological engineering. The bones of Quetzalcoatlus were hollow, their walls barely a few millimeters thick, and inside they were braced with a lattice of tiny structural struts, thin enough to be impossibly light, connected to an internal system of air sacs that hollowed out the skeleton even further. Quetzalcoatlus wasn't just large. It may have been as large as a flying animal can ever be, but knowing it could be light enough is only half the problem, because there was still the small matter of getting a 500-pound body into the air. For decades, this was the question that split the field. Some scientists doubted Quetzalcoatlus could fly at all. Maybe, they argued, it was a giant ground walker, grounded for life. The doubt came from the takeoff. Think about how a big bird launches. An albatross runs into the wind, wings beating until it lifts away. Now try that with Quetzalcoatlus. Its wings spanned over 10 meters. The instant it tried to flap on a running start, the wingtips would smash straight into the dirt on the downstroke. A running takeoff was impossible. So how did it fly? The breakthrough came from biomechanist Michael Habib. Quetzalcoatlus didn't run, it jumped. Picture it crouched low to the ground, loading the enormous muscles of its hind legs and its forelimbs at once. Then, release. In a single explosive vault, it threw its entire 500-pound body straight upward, clearing roughly 8 feet of air from a dead stop. Only at the top of that leap, with the ground safely below the wingtips, did it snap those vast wings down for the first beat. And once it was up, those same wings that couldn't survive a running start became the most efficient soaring machines the sky has ever seen, riding thermals, covering possibly thousands of kilometers with barely a flap. But if launching cost that much explosive power, what was this creature doing when it came back down? Because the way it moved on the ground is just as strange as the way it left it. Older documentaries showed big pterosaurs hauling themselves along the ground like vampire bats, shoving forward on their folded wings in an ugly crawl. That, too, was wrong. The real walk was stranger and oddly elegant. On the ground, Quetzalcoatlus moved on all fours, but its forelimb bones were so absurdly long that the folded wings worked less like legs and more like a pair of giant walking sticks, ski poles. So picture the gait. It lifts its left arm, plants it forward like a pole, swings the left leg through, then repeats on the right, a careful 4-point stride built entirely around not tripping over its own enormous wings. The result was a slow, deliberate, alien swagger. Nothing alive today moves remotely like it. A creature taller than a man at the shoulder, marching across the floodplain on living ski poles. And the place it was marching toward forces us to throw out the most famous image of all. For years, artists loved one picture above all others: Quetzalcoatlus gliding low over the ocean, beak dipped into the water, skimming up fish like a giant version of a modern skimmer bird. It's a beautiful image. It's also physically impossible. Run the numbers, as researchers did in 2007, and the problem is brutal. An animal this large, dragging its beak through water at flight speed, would generate enormous drag. And if that beak caught a wave, the force could wrench its head sideways and snap its neck. The skull and neck simply weren't built to survive it. So forget the graceful sea glider. The real Quetzalcoatlus was something far more unsettling. In 2008, researchers Mark Witten and Darren Naish reframed the entire animal. Quetzalcoatlus and its relatives, or the Ajdarchids, weren't fishes. They were terrestrial stalkers. And the right setting isn't a sunlit ocean. It's a dark Cretaceous marsh. Picture it there, a 12-foot predator wading through shallow rivers and pushing through the brush, head held high, scanning the ground. It moved through that landscape like a monstrous heron, a stalk the size of a giraffe, and when it spotted prey, a small dinosaur, a mammal, a lizard, a crab, an amphibian, it lowered that 2-meter head and seized the animal in its long, toothless beak and swallowed it whole. Picture a flock of them, giraffe tall, fuzzy, sharp-beaked, striding through the mist of a Cretaceous floodplain on their ski pole limbs, picking off anything small enough to swallow. Less a graceful glider, more the apex nightmare of the marsh. But the strangest part of the whole story isn't how it lived, it's when. Quetzalcoatlus lived at the very end of the Cretaceous, roughly 68 to 66 million years ago, right at the close of the age of dinosaurs. And it wasn't just a pterosaur. It was one of the last pterosaurs that ever lived. For most of their history, pterosaurs had been astonishingly diverse, hundreds of species, every size, ruling the skies for over 150 million years. But by the end of the Cretaceous, that diversity had collapsed. The small and medium forms were gone. Only the giant ajdarchids remained, the last titans in an emptying sky. Why did the rest vanish? One leading hypothesis points to birds, which diversified rapidly through the Cretaceous and may have outcompeted smaller pterosaurs, squeezing them out. The giants, with no rivals at their scale, held on, but this is still debated. What we know is that Quetzalcoatlus was there on the last day of the Mesozoic. 66 million years ago, an asteroid about 10 kilometers across struck near the Yucatan. It ended the age of dinosaurs in a geological instant and finished off more than 150 million years of vertebrate flight in a single catastrophe. When Quetzalcoatlus died, an entire dynasty of the air died with it, and nothing that large would ever fly again. Not for 66 million years, not ever.